Let's get started. How's that sound? All right, guys, well, welcome to the show. We've had a couple of really fun shows recently. We've talked about the NAR settlement. We've talked about how different ways that people own real estate. And all those videos are on YouTube if you haven't seen them or want to go back and see something else. And I've even started breaking them up into smaller bits. They have like 30-second or 1 minute or 2 minute little sections of things that I thought were really interesting. And we'll continue doing that this year. And people have really enjoyed it. So if you have ideas or if you want something to be promoted or talked about, just let us know. I mean, we're always looking for great ideas. And so to that NAR settlement, Dad, you and I are being asked to be panelists on a panel tomorrow in Fort Myers. It's a little far away, but it's in Fort Myers. If you guys are interested in joining, I think there are still about 10 spots available, but I think it's from like 9:30 till noon tomorrow. And they're going to be brokers and realtors, and then the two of us on there. And, it's still a little early. Dad, you and I have talked a lot, the initial impact of what NAR was and kind of how that settlement was looking. And then, then you hit the next stage is like, all right, well, what is this actually going to be? And now you're even, you start thinking about, well, is this going to change anything at all? I don't know, Dad. I mean, I'm pretty opinionated about all this, but what's your latest thought on how this is going to play out?
I hate to admit it, but I've been watching YouTube videos by other lawyers in different states looking at this. And a lot of the things that are mandatory, and it's mainly paragraph 28, the practice changes in the settlement agreement. A lot of the stuff that they're mandating, we already can't do anyways. The big one is putting in MLS what the selling agent would get paid. The other big one is that the people who are covered by this thing have to cooperate with the plaintiffs in their other class action suits. I think that's been lost in the shuffle quite a bit. And then the third thing lawyers are saying, and investment bankers and all these experts, is questioning whether or not the Department of Justice is going to intervene before this thing is resolved. I mean, there's a lot of people who think they might. And so part of this, we're just hanging up in the air, not knowing what the heck the Department of Justice is going to do. We know they think commissions are too high. That's their perception. The public thinks that it's an election year. Will they do it? So there's a lot of what ifs right now. And that's my feeling. I mean, the more I watch, the more I question, and I've read the settlement agreement. Good time to be focusing on listings, honestly.
Yeah, I think the other thing that you've always mentioned, my grandfather, your dad was a big realtor.
Yeah.
And this is an age-old problem, but he would have buyers, clients of his who would, they would leave him out of a deal. Even if it was involuntary, they would go to a new construction subdivision and they wouldn't put his name down. And so this is a problem that has been out there for a while. And I think the biggest problem is if you don't get your buyer signed up front, you risk even more than ever getting cut out of a deal, not having something signed.
I mean, I've been listening to that since I was 16 years old. I mean, that and buyers losing allegiance to him and going to somewhere else. So it'll definitely fix that. That'll be one plus out of this whole thing. People will get more educated. That's a plus. A lot of the public thinks that 6% is mandatory, and it's not. So they're going to be better educated on it. Unfortunately, there's a chance that, and again, this is the last lady I was listening to, and another lawyer, and all us lawyers have different opinions. She's concerned that buyers might suffer through this. They might not get adequate representation. Some of our deals might be harder, as you know, when you have two great agents involved in a transaction, the deal goes 1,000 times smoother. You get one that's not quite up to par. You get more bumps in the road, or they're listening to family members who bought a house 30 years ago. They could have a lot of wisdom, but they don't know Florida. They know New Jersey. So there's good things that can happen, there's bad things that might be happening, but there's definitely things that will be happening.
Yeah, I draw a lot of similarities, or try to draw some comparisons to different businesses. And so one of the scenarios, and I actually just got off the phone with an attorney here in town, Dad, that's he's been in town for a long time. And he was telling me that his buyer is using an internet bank in order to hold all his money, and that's how he's wiring money for closing. He goes, and he said, he's too old to be using an internet bank. He needs to be able to just go into a branch and do it that way. And I think there's some similarities there, that if you're younger, I could see the scenario where you might try and go it alone as a buyer, and we're just going to have a little bit more of that potentially after this settlement. But if the people that we serve here in this community that tend to be a little older, they don't know this area very well, they're going to need boots on the ground. They're going to need that local branch to come and help them get familiar with the area.
Yeah.
So
Personally, I want the people to use buyers realtors. It makes
we
your
did,
job,
yeah.
my job 1,000 times easier. People have been saying to me that, well, gee, Don, you guys will be able to charge more to the buyers. Well, that's just a lot more man hours, in each and every individual deal, which will limit how many transactions you can do. And doing enough FSBOs as we've done, I mean, that's just, in my opinion, not worth the pay they give you. It just
No,
isn't.
I agree. You and I both agree on that. You and I don't want to be the realtor in the deal. It's
No.
it's a totally different skill set. It's more hands-on. The other thing I will make a comparison to, and this is maybe something people don't want to hear as much. This is going to be the hard part, in my opinion, is with title insurance, the buyer gets that fee the week of closing. When they get their final settlement statement, they see a number on there, and it actually says on the settlement statement, it says optional. And Dad, you and I combat this all the time when the buyer says, well, I don't want that. I'm not going to get title. It's optional. I'm not going to do that. Well, on $1 million deal, that's a $5,000 title insurance policy.
Right.
And I think, our clients, for the most part, they really see the value in that. You and I see the value in it. It's why we choose to do it this way as opposed to just charging attorney's fees. It doesn't make sense to do a closing without title insurance. And it's, that's a $5,000 policy.
It's almost malpractice, in my opinion. And a lot of the objections that I would run into would be from people in states where the title insurance rate was much lower. And not to keep picking on New York, but their title insurance rate is much lower per dollar value of the property. But in New York, you always have an attorney that you're paying on top of that.
Yeah.
So I always have to explain to the client that, where you come from, the total dollars you pay to close the transaction is probably more than what you're paying us, and you have us available all the time.
The reason why I bring it up is not the value of that. It's the fact that you and I get asked about, we have to deal with this a lot. And I think the realtor maybe going to have to deal with this a little bit more. Buyers, when prices continue to go up and they're squeezed for money, or they think they're being overcharged, they're going to look at all the items on their list and they're going to start negotiating it. They negotiate insurance, they negotiate what they pay as their purchase price, and more so now the realtors' commissions are on the table. So that's the one real concern that I see, is that you guys are going to have to learn that skill set again. And I think listing agents have that. You're used to negotiating. All right, am I going to charge 4%, 5%, 6%? Right. What's the number? I think as a buyer's agent, you now have to do that on the buyer side as well. So it's not a scary thing. It's just that it needs to be done up front.
The good realtors, I mean, you mentioned my father. I mean, he'd do fine no matter what. I mean, so he's just a survivor, and he worked his tail off, and he knew people. He wasn't afraid to put the work in, know your farm area, all that stuff. But you and I on a daily basis deal with people who are buying multi-million-dollar properties, and they object to paying hundreds of dollars for an inspection or having a survey, and it takes all my willpower to just not say, "Are you kidding me? You're spending all this money and you're not going to investigate what you're purchasing. Before you write that check, you should know everything you could possibly know.
Yeah. So there's
I wish I could say that, honestly.
I worked, well, I mean, it's funny you said that. I worked for an attorney up in Atlanta, Peter Babcock, who is one of the managing
BC
partners up
grad.
at Campbell and Brannon. And he was asked to make a presentation on title insurance. And he showed remember the Titans movie with Denzel Washington, and he's the high school football coach. And he comes up to the kid and he's like, "Are you outside your damn mind? What are you crazy?"
I'd love to say that. It's just, I mean, they don't understand the whole process. I get it, but they're not frugal when it comes to buying a multi-million-dollar piece of property, but all of a sudden they break out into a rash when it's a survey. Really? What's wrong with you?
Well, let's talk about surveys. So that was what we were talking about. Actually, Vicky, before we jump on, Vicky had a question. She says, if I have a buyer broker agreement, does that have anything to do with agency? Would it be a single agent or still a transaction agent? It's a great question, Vicky. Transaction agent is the default. And unless you are selecting specifically your agency on that form, you're going to be transactional agent. It's not going to change anything. That being said, if you're asking a buyer to pay you a certain commission and work for you, you may want to bring this up and say, hey, look, in consideration of you paying this commission, I am going to be a single agent on this one. I'm solely going to be representing you, and I'm going to have, much higher duty of confidentiality. So it could be a selling point or a value proposition when you're promoting the buyer brokerage agreement, but it doesn't require that you do it that way.
She's going to have the same duty to transition to transactional if trying to purchase a property within the same brokerage company, because all the listings belong to the broker. So if they're both going to be under one roof, you have to transaction to transactional.
Yeah, so we'll see how the forms change on that. I know that they are completely remodeling all the buyer brokerage agreements and the listing agreements, not only in NAR, but also in FAR. So we'll see exactly what happens with that.
You notice that form requires the duty to obey. You ever see that?
Oh, no, I never looked at that.
It always kills me because that wasn't even in my wedding vows. It's in this.
Yeah, that's weird.
Duty to obey.
Never noticed that. Okay, so surveys, if we get back to more of, what makes you guys great. And actually to that point, I read an article from a guy who's written a lot about the NAR lawsuit and other things. And he said that the key is we all have to be better. And I think that's great. So we all have to be better. We have to be better at our job, better at advising our clients. And one of those ways is surveys. And it's, interestingly, Dad, you mentioned before we got started that, you have family in other parts of the country and they say they never get a survey. Well, there's a lot that leads to that. And I'll give you some examples. I don't know Cape Cod as well, but in Georgia, where I used to practice, surveys, there was an automatic survey coverage for all lenders. Automatic, whether there was a survey or not, the lender's title insurance covered the lenders for survey issues. And so the lenders did not require a survey. And that was in Georgia. So you saw, across the board, people did not get surveys in Georgia because the lender didn't require it.
That might be it on the Cape, honestly, Christian.
It could, well, and that's what I was thinking. Maybe in Massachusetts, it's similar. Maybe they have an automatic survey protection to a lender, and therefore the lenders never even require it. Compare that with Florida. There is a survey exception on all lenders' policies, and the only way to remove it is to get an updated survey or some sort of survey affidavit.
I look at that, it's sort of like somebody just wanting mortgagee insurance, and you have to explain to them the bank's protected, but you're not.
Right.
I would speculate that in Mass, it's probably the same thing.
I have a feeling that's where it comes. But looking at Florida, if you have a loan and it's a single family home, that you own fee simple, you're going to need a survey. There's no doubt about it. And that
they want the survey exception deleted from the final policy, and that's the only way you get it.
The lender thinks it's a value to know whether there are any survey issues. And so I actually found a couple of articles online. Let's see if I can share this screen. So this was a survey company that I found, and they have this blog that did a pretty good job. They were called Bettersworth and Associates, and this is not even a Florida survey company, I believe, but I just thought it was good because the principles are the same no matter what. So establishing boundaries in property ownership, that's the key. What do I own? Where is my property versus yours? And in Florida, more than anywhere, I would argue, what you're buying is the land. The right to be in that spot is the value. So, if you instead choose to ignore the survey, you're basically ignoring half or more of the value in the property. So let's establish what we own, and more importantly, what we don't own. Who owns what we don't own? Resolving boundary disputes. If there's a fence that's crossing the line, or a retaining wall, or maybe a pool that was installed just recently, we need to know, is it over the line? Whose is it? That sort of stuff. Validating property transactions. Dad, that's what you and I are focused on. We want to know, we want to be able to ensure to the lender that there are no survey issues, that we own exactly what the deed and the legal specifies. Adherence to legal requirements. There could be certain easements that we need to validate or understand. I had a client once. I had a client once that they were looking at houses. They wanted one with a pool. They wanted one with a pool. They wanted one with a pool, and they ended up finding one without a pool, but with a great backyard. And so they go under contract. They put their deposit down. They order a survey, and they find out, oh, there's an easement right through the backyard. Well, now we don't want the house anymore. That's not going to work for us because we can't put the pool over an easement. And there was no other way to know. You could do a property search, but it wasn't going to be as in black and white as the survey would show us. Dad, you mentioned zoning regulations. How is that applicable for legal requirements? What does that mean?
Well, it's part of standard C in the NAR contract, what you can look for in a survey situation, and it would be any violation of county requirements, which would include the building department. You go to FARBAR and they get a little more detailed on what the setbacks have to be at a minimum, 7.5 feet.
So we'll talk about setbacks. Basically, there's an envelope that you can put the house in, and you can't be over the envelope. You can't be over here. The county wants you to be in a specific little area, and if you're not in that area, you could be in violation of the zoning requirements. So pretty important. You don't want to pay top dollar for something that you're going to have to tear down. Preserving historical records. I'm not really sure what they mean by that. Enhancing long-term property management. And then a total summary. Accurate legal descriptions and boundary surveys play a critical role in preserving the property rights, resolving disputes, validating transactions, adhering, all those things we just mentioned. Accurate legal descriptions form the foundation for determining property boundaries, establishing ownerships, and ensuring that property transactions are conducted smoothly and transparently. What did trying to remember who it was, but you don't know what you don't know.
Is that Rumsfeld?
Rumsfeld. Yeah, so you don't know what you don't know, and the survey is a big piece of that. We're going to pull up some examples of surveys that I've seen just in the last few months. Some of them are more problematic than others. So let's look at it. And actually, before we do that, Dad, here's the question. You go under contract, and send in the deal. Ross Title sends out to the buyer a questionnaire. Are you ordering a survey? Would you like us to order a survey for you? And the buyer turns and asks their real estate agent, well, should I? What's the answer, Dad? Should they order?
Ask a lawyer. It should be yes to everything I tell people.
That's right. Yes. The answer is yes, of course. Of course you should. Why not?
I used to make a joke out of it, Christian. I mean, whether it's should I have an inspection or should I order a survey? And without being a smart, I would say, well, if you run into a problem down the line when you're trying to sell the place, do I have to write you a check? And then they kind of get it. I mean, you don't need it until you need it,
right?
If it's
here's the scenario that we come across a lot. The buyer has spent the last week negotiating the purchase price. They may have ended up having to spend a little bit more than they really wanted to. And now they start cutting back on costs. They start nickel and diming things and saying, do I really need that? You know, they're not really thinking about it holistically. And Dad, you always made the analogy to you buy the brand new Mercedes and then you choose not to get the oil changed.
I
Or you
use
don't,
that one. I use the Las Vegas Poca one. I mean, if you're buying $1 million house and the survey is say $800, I'll say to the client, would you gamble $1 million to win $800 if you were in Vegas?
yeah.
You know, no matter what the odds are, no matter how
It's insurance. It's no different than an inspection or
it's a risk
insurance, or
reward
we
analysis.
don't know what we don't know. So the easy answer is if they ask you if they should get a survey, you should say absolutely. We always recommend you get a survey. Now, if they come back and say, "Oh my gosh, the survey is, $2,800 and the
Yeah,
seller had one from 12 months ago. Do I really need to spend?" Well, then you say, why don't we talk to the attorney? Let's see what they think. Let's ask the seller if they'll sign a survey
refer to the
affidavit.
attorney. You do not want to be the one recommended they don't get anything.
Exactly, exactly. All right, let's look at some of this. First, actually, even before that, Dad, do you need a survey if it's a condo?
No,
No, you do not. The way condos are platted is they everything is on public record. So you own a specific unit within a larger, association or a building.
right.
And in fact, your condo building will have blueprints of your specific unit. And so
Yeah.
you know exactly what you own. It's already been surveyed, it's already done. You
Yeah,
don't
they have
own
a
the
condo
land.
survey in the public records already.
Yeah. So there's already a survey in public records, but that is not the case for single family homes. With single family homes, you have a subdivided property. So you have this large tract and it gets subdivided into 1,000 lots or whatever it may have been. And it does not have a copy of where the house is or where the fence is or where the pool was added. It's not going to have any of that information. It's just the lot lines. So what a surveyor does is they go to the county records, they pull the plat, and then they go down to the property and they determine, all right, here's the plat, here are the lot lines, and here's the house, here are the improvements. And so that's what we're going after, is that we want to know that the house was put where it's supposed to be and that there are no improvements that are over the property lines. That's the job. That's what we're trying to figure out. And there's really no other way to do it. You really can't do it any other way.
I always assume, like when we have a situation like this, that my buyer is someday going to sell the property and that buyer is going to get a mortgage and it will be mandated. So you might as well do it now than let your subsequent buyer find out the hard way, the more expensive way, that there's an issue.
Exactly, exactly. And then the comment you get back is, well, we didn't have a problem when we bought it. It's like, well, did you get a survey? I don't know.
The flip side of that, Christian, is persuading sellers that it's to their advantage to look for the old survey. They feel like, I think it's an inconvenience. I'm not getting anything out of this. It won't benefit me in any way. And I have to persuade them by saying, if the buyer has to go out and get their own and they find a 2-inch encroachment into the building setback, you're going to have to file an administrative variance, and that the filing fee alone is
Well,
$1,000.
we'll talk about that shortly. There is,
Okay.
how the seller should respond and why it's value. So here's one example. You have your legal description. They
Right.
they go down, they pull the plat. This is lot 10. And the difference between the plat and this survey, like we talked about, is that it's showing the house. So when I read a survey, I always find the property lines first. That's the most important part. Find the property lines of these the black lines here. They've got the 4 dots. I'm assuming this is not the property line. Of course, the example that I'm giving, it's not 100% clear, but it seems that the property line is this C2 is that rear property line there.
Right.
So you've got your driveway coming into the front of the house. Dad, why don't they own all the way to the road? What's that all about?
There's always a utility easement,
Right of way, right
like
of
that.
way.
Yeah, right away too.
Yep. So the county usually owns the right of way. So in this case, it's right past the sidewalk. So the sidewalk, this is where the property line starts right there to this end over here, all the way to the back and the back. So when I look at a survey, I highlight that property line. And I want to see, is anything crossing over those property lines? It's almost like if you came home and your son's bicycle was in the neighbor's yard. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Is anything in the neighbor's yard that should be in mine? I'm looking for fences. I'm looking for the house. I'm looking for, a pool or a shed, a gazebo, anything of that nature. I'd say in this case, I don't see anything. Nothing really jumps off the page to me. Interestingly, you have setbacks. So if you notice these dotted lines, I wonder if I can do some sort of annotation here. Yeah, looks like I can.
Usually these have annotations on them, Chris.
What'd you say?
Usually these surveys have the annotations on.
I'm just trying to, for our purposes, you can see this yellow. Can you see that, Dad?
No, but my eyes are useless.
Useless eyes, right? It is there. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger.
I can see it.
It's there. Okay, so that's our front setback. That's determined by zoning code on how far back the house has to be from the property line.
Right.
So the good thing about this house is that is within the front setback, so it is not over the setback. And then separately, there seems to be a side setback, but this survey may not show it. It is showing, 4 feet on either side. So if this is a 5-foot setback, you could have a minor encroachment in that case.
It might be an older house, Christian. We had that with that $8.5 million deal near the beach. It was an old cottage from the 50s.
Yep, absolutely. This is a survey from 2018, so it's not too old, but it is, 6, 7, 8 years old. It's getting there. It's 6 years old. So this would be okay as long as the seller was willing to sign a survey affidavit saying, we haven't made any changes since the survey was done. We haven't added a pool. We haven't put in a fence or anything like that. If that's the case, the buyer would not be required to get a survey, but they may want one. It's possible. The other part that I think is interesting on this one is you've got some elevation information for the flood elevation.
Yeah.
So it's saying the flood zone AE has base elevation of 7 feet. And that panel was last updated in 2012. So it would probably bear looking at it again to make sure that the base flood elevation hasn't changed. But this is a good survey. This one's clean. I like that one.
Okay. I have 2 ways to improve it, if I might. A lot of times I'll suggest to people they might want to have that survey recertified by the same company to them. That way, one, it's up to date.
What does that mean, Dad?
That they have a contractual arrangement with you and the same degree of responsibility in terms of negligence and liability.
And the point of doing it that way would be to save money, right?
It's much less than buying a survey from scratch.
Maybe. So the counter I would do is that some survey companies, even if they could do it cheaper because you're recertifying it, they may choose not to. They may charge the same amount. They might, especially this one, they might say it's been 6 years. We got to go down. We got to see it for ourselves.
But anyways, I'll try that. And if not that, then we have what's in the contract that if there's been no change, the seller is supposed to sign an affidavit of no change along with the survey.
Yep, absolutely.
If there's change, we want to know. If there's been an addition, we should know about it.
Exactly. So that's our first one. Here's another one. Let's see. So again, let's pull up my annotation, see if I can get this right. You've got your property line. In this case, they did a good job for me because they put the property line in green. And a couple of things that you jump right off the bat. Again, this practice, I always want to look at my encroachments first. This is a fence. This right here is a fence. And it is encroaching. It is a neighbor's fence. It might be tied in. Maybe they're connecting 2 fences together. It's hard to tell exactly what they're trying to do here. But seemingly they do have a fence. It is tied in. And so you have an encroachment right here. You also have another encroachment back here. And again, encroachment is when you cross the line. So when you do that, you really don't have the right to do that, but you've done it anyways. And let's see, clear.
Is it
And
clear
then
to you that it's this lot's fence, or is it could be somebody else's?
it looks like it's this lot's fence, but it might be connected to a neighbor. You
The
also
east
have the
side,
fence going through a utility easement, a 5-foot utility easement, and the
yeah,
back of it, the rear of it, is entirely in someone else's property. Now, is that a major issue? It really depends. It may not be. Not all encroachments are created equal. I'll
right.
put it that way. Not all encroachments are created equal. A
Mhm.
fence, like a wood fence that could be moved in a couple of hours, not a huge deal.
Not a big deal.
And there could be some geographical reasons why they did it this way. Maybe there's a berm, maybe there's like a lake in behind the house. In this case, there could be a pond, and therefore no one really cares if the fence goes a foot into the HOA property. And they're just willing to go with it. Not a huge deal, not something I would worry about usually. Elsewhere, you have to think about, this was the one that I was a little bit more concerned about. Let's see if I can. It's this right here on the bottom. So it looks here that
Bricks,
we've got some sort of walkway, concrete pavers, something that
yeah.
encroaches onto the neighbor's property. It seems to be 0.64 over the line. So, it's a half a foot. It's not a major deal. The one question we always used to ask was, is if the neighbor made you remove that piece, that offending piece, would it
Right.
limit your access? Would you not be able to access the house? Or like if it was a driveway, now you can't get into the garage? In this case, I don't like that it's over the line. But it's maybe not the worst thing in the world.
The
Any thoughts?
intangible is that, they're your neighbors. If you're gonna live there full time, you wanna be on good relations with your neighbors. So you really gotta look at what kind, is it pavers, or is it a wire fence or a plastic fence? If it's the neighbor's fence that's encroaching onto lot 46 in this case, how do you balance keeping good relations with the neighbor? And you personally not caring that the fence is over a little bit, and your ability to resell it down the road.
Yvette mentions, it might be a bigger deal if this is concrete. So let's talk about that. Actually, it's a good point.
Yeah, a good
There is
point.
no liability for a buyer who didn't install it. They don't have any legal liability for having it be over the line. The worst that could happen for a buyer is that the neighbor could someday come, either ask them to remove that piece, or the neighbor themselves could remove that piece. They could come with a concrete saw and
You
just
just cut it
cut
off.
the line the way it should have been. And that would be distressing. I don't think any buyer should walk into something like that. So a lot of times what I'll recommend is, let's get something from the neighbor saying that they'll let it stay there. It's called an encroachment agreement, that
Yes.
you won't make me move it. You won't come and change it later. We'll just leave it there. And some neighbors they're amenable to that. Others not so much. It really depends. But if you find out before you buy, we can object to it and make the seller deal with it. Or realistically, we can ask for some money. You see something like this and the buyer is thinking, oh, that's not the worst thing in the world, but maybe I can get $1,500 from the seller. And, then I'll just, we'll just close. It'll be fine.
If it was something minor where your fence or their fence was encroaching onto your property, and it's not a concrete fence, sometimes I would use a revocable license agreement, which is the same as a ball game ticket, where the buyer goes to the neighbor and says, look, your fence encroaches onto the lot I'm buying. We love your fence. It looks beautiful, but we want you to sign this piece of paper saying you don't own our lot, and that if and when I sell it, you'll remove it if I ask you.
Yep.
So that keeps relations with the neighbor. Everybody's friendly. You're exchanging cakes and all that jazz.
Yeah,
And you're preserving your legal rights.
it's more comforting, but it's not legally enforceable in any way. You couldn't keep the fence there if the neighbor decided to change their mind later. So it kind of depends, going back to not all encroachments are created equal.
No.
The other thing you'll notice on this survey is they don't list any setbacks. We like surveys that include the setbacks on it. I don't know why this one doesn't have setbacks, but
Yeah, it's not that old. They should have setbacks. I'm
it should have
surprised.
setbacks on here, because I want to make sure, like, they're showing here that the house is 29.48 feet from the property line. If it's a 30-foot setback, technically that's a violation, even if it's just half a foot.
Don't they have
Over here
comments
would be
on the
fine.
encroachments here, Christian? I don't see where they commented. They usually list all the
On the
problems.
bottom here, they list it. So fence encumbers 5-foot utility easement along north boundary line. Concrete extends beyond west
Okay.
boundary line. And then this one I always thought was funny. Driveway extends beyond the south boundary line. No duh.
How else are they gonna get off the
How
property?
else are they gonna get to the house? It's a right of way. Now, if the county did not own this land, yes, that'd be a problem. You'd have access issues. But this is a right of way. This is fine. Not worried about that.
I've had attorneys up north object to the utility easement along the front of the lot saying Pelican Marsh. It says every house in that development has it. You know, they have to be able to service, you know, the water pipes and so forth.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's see. All right, this is another property. So again, we've got the green highlights. Here's our property line on the front. If you notice, see if I can highlight this as well. It says that it's a
VHP is right up the line.
10-foot PUE, which is some sort of private utility easement. So they're saying that they're running something in here as a utilities. It could be Comcast, it could be power, water, something like that. But there is a utility easement in the front of that property. And then let's see what else we've got to contend with. They do have, oh, this one is a good one. So this was a recent one. This is the front setback. And so what are we noticing, Dad? The house
It's built
encroaches
beyond
over the setback. This one was a problem. And so we got this. It showed that the house was 15 feet from the property line.
Was it
And
an old
it was
house?
a 20-foot setback. So it encroaches by 5 feet. So
Must
we
be
sent
old
an
house.
email to the seller's attorney and said, hey, this is, you know, an encroachment. We want the seller to get a variance or somehow to get this resolved. And actually what we found out on this is that the surveyor made a mistake. The surveyor put the wrong setback. And so the seller was great because they had an existing survey. And this goes back to what you mentioned before, Dad, that having a survey and providing it to the buyer could be really impactful. Because if the seller had given that survey to begin with,
Yeah.
the buyer, one, may not have gotten their own survey. They may have just relied on the sellers. And two, they were able to combat a wrong survey, something that was wrong.
And plus they build some goodwill, so it makes the seller look like they're really wonderful people.
That's right, exactly. So in this scenario, we'll see. I think I might have uploaded the updated one, but what they did is everything else was right, but they changed this setback to be about there. And then you didn't have any sort of problems with the setback, at least. If we keep going, this is the side setback. It's an annotation thing. I'm not very good at it. So this is your side setback. And it looks like it's about 5 feet. Oh, here it is. 5-foot
right along
building
the line.
setback line per plat. So 5 foot on that side, and then you're gonna have another 5 feet over here. And then let's keep going back. You notice here you actually have some tile. Some sort of paver, small little piece. I'm not sure what they use it for. Maybe it's like a step off from the pool. That is technically encroaching into the setback, but I don't think it's a problem.
How about the air conditioners, Chris?
Yep. So air conditioners are, where are they?
There's one on the far east side down.
Not there. Oh, down here. Hold on. Let's see. How do I
I
get
think you
there?
gotta scroll it,
Down here. Yeah, it was up near the front of the property.
just so people know.
So here's your AC. AC can be in the setback without an issue. That is not a building code violation or a zoning violation. So you're allowed to have that without needing a variance. Anything else on here? Oh, this is interesting. An 18-foot lake maintenance and drainage easement. We don't have anything in this 18-foot area. We have nothing in there, but if you did have something, like if you wanted to put a pool, if you were wanting to put a gazebo, it could be a violation of this easement. The lakes, the reason why they do these easements is they're trying to maintain the aesthetic or the drainage regarding that lake. And you'll also see that for golf courses. You'll see some sort of golf course easement. And it's just, there's no combating it. It just is what it is. If you want to live on a golf course or on a lake, you're probably going to see something like this. And it goes back to like, how do you set client expectations? If they see this and they're like, oh my gosh, there's an easement. I didn't know I couldn't. And it's like, well, this is how it is on every lake house. There's no other way to do it.
One thing I see a lot of is when the house or its structure encroaches into the lake maintenance easement, and it usually goes back to the original developer who was just trying to induce people to buy. They give them a couple extra feet for the pool enclosure. And the giveaway for that is when you look at the aerial view from the appraiser's office, it's the whole street. Everybody got to go in 2 feet quicker.
Exactly. So, we want context, and that's something that's pretty important if you're a listing agent too, where they do a survey, they object to something, and you're like, but all the houses are like that. Every single one.
A deal was cut back in the day. Absolutely.
Right. Exactly. It's got to be somewhere. In fact, if you look on this one, interestingly, you have a rear setback that's inside or outside the easement. So it's almost like there's an additional layer that you wouldn't be able to build into. Let's keep going on this. Let's see the next one.
You had a lot of
this was the same survey. They didn't update it, so never mind. There is another one. Let's see what this one is. I can't remember.
Marco Island Civic Association. Is that my house? No.
No, it is not. So this is a home on Marco. Waives and releases any right it may have to enforce the setback restrictions pertaining to the encroachment stated in item 3 above contained on subject property. So Marco Island Civic Association, this was one I dealt with recently. And it works no different than like an HOA or City of Naples, but Marco Island, they have city restrictions, they have county restrictions, they also have MICA restrictions, Marco Island Civic Association, and not all the homes are subject to MICA. I believe mine is. Dad, I don't think yours is.
No, mine is. We've had to deal with Ruth on our house.
Ruth's great, and Ruth is great. She got me this acknowledgement, but basically, the funny thing on this one, there was a slight encroachment because the builder, when they put it together, they didn't adhere to the MICA restrictions. They only adhered to Marco Island or county restrictions. And so we went to Ruth McCann and said, Ruth, we've got a problem. Can we solve it? She goes, yeah, just pay the $200 fee for the letter and we'll waive our restriction.
I got out of my MICA situation because of you, Christian.
Well, Ruth's good to me. She's been great.
You knew Ruth's daughter, apparently.
Yes.
In high school or something.
So here's the next one. Let's see. Fence encumbers 5-foot drainage easements along the east and west property line. Dad, is that a problem?
Where is it, Christian?
Well, it encroaches in the back here on the side.
So it's this lot's fence and it encroaches.
Drainage easements. And there's a canal in the back.
I always throw at people. I mean, the utility easement is so that, say it's with the phone company, it's so that they can take care of the wires. Can they do that if you have a fence there? Sure. Is there a slight chance they might have to move part of the fence if it's really, really bad? Sure, but it's minimal. Nobody put fences on the inside of an easement on their own lot.
The interesting thing on this one is you do have, you have this fence, you have an encroachment here. I'd say that's a bigger issue. Is that you're encroaching on the neighbor's property right there. You're not encroaching it over here. So it's almost interesting. You're over by 2 feet here, and you're inside 2 feet over there. So
See, it's a chain link fence too. I look at that and say, okay, it's a chain link fence. We can
yeah,
move it if we
chain
have
link
to.
fence, exactly. So chain link fence, is this a major deal? And that's where context is key. The first thing, it being up to the canal, I'm not worried about that. There's a canal. There's a dock. Even though they don't own all the way to the canal, it makes practical sense to have the fence go all the way out. Now, could the county or the city or somebody come out and say, hey, you need to bring that back in, that's not your property?
No.
Maybe, but I'd probably let it go. I wouldn't make this a big deal.
I just warn the client of the risk and point out it's a chain link fence, and do you want to keep it there because of the improved quality of use of the property?
Yeah.
Your dog has more room, that sort of thing.
I agree. It's all about talking to the client.
The
So
context,
here's the setback again, right here. It looks like that might be the setback. Limits of well field by plat. I'm not sure what that would be.
it's well water, looks like.
Let's see what else. I don't see any other, if you just, again, if you look at the green property lines, I don't see anything else that's problematic. You've got your side setback.
You got the fence on the west side going onto somebody else's property.
I don't know what this is.
Limits of drain field by plat. And it's 1.77
Oh, that was
feet.
look at this. That was the original westerly platted lot line of lot 7. So what this is like a lot and a half. So they combined lots, took a portion of some other lot. That's what that is. All right.
We had situations where they vacated prior plats and then replatted, and they didn't fully vacate the prior plat. So we had messes for that scenario.
So this one is a fun one.
Oh boy.
It's a big piece of land. I think this is 10 acres. And there's a lot going on. This would be a very expensive survey, incredibly expensive survey, because you've got land, you've got brush, trees. It's huge, and there are 3 structures on the property. There's just a lot going on. You could spend all day understanding this survey, and you probably should, because in this case, the buyer was buying it for the land value. Interestingly, the notes are really, really important. I think in this case more than ever. So the notes talk about setbacks, they talk about the acreage, they talk about easements, total area that was surveyed, all this stuff is really, really helpful. The notes are huge. It's like reading the footnotes. It gives you the context.
You got oil and gas rights in there somewhere.
And so you just, this is a huge deal. If you're a land broker, that's a big one. That's something that you could have a lot of fun with. And then here's another property. This was also an expensive lot to survey. I don't remember exactly what it cost, but let's see. Yep, Leon County, Florida. So in this case, you obviously don't have any real setback issues, but interestingly, there's your setback line. They really cut that close, didn't they?
Yeah, concrete pads a little bit into the plane.
Yeah, and it's slightly, probably not a huge concern. I wouldn't be worried about it.
What's the FCM?
Probably power meter, some sort of Florida power meter. He's talking about this area here.
And this all reiterates the importance of getting the original survey, which ostensibly will be clean. And if it's old,
exactly. And they're gonna, if you notice, they've got 2 notes on here. One is in parentheses and one is not. And I think one of them would be per the plat or per the deed, and the other one is exactly what they found when they were on the site. And so, Dad, you and I have talked about that before. Which one takes precedence? It's not 100% the accuracy. It's like, well, what is the historical dimensions compared to what this one shows? And usually the historical weighs out. Is that right?
Yes, it's usually the historical. The very first one is the start point, when you're planning a property, And then anything after that, it's an opinion of a survey. It's that survey's opinion, and historical usually prevails, except when it conflicts with the original platting.
Perfect.
Can't
Well, I think we've probably bored everybody
that to
enough at
death.
this point. I think they've had enough of us. But surveys,
What are
I
they
think
talking
that
about?
generally what I would suggest is, and this is something I've seen a lot, where your own decision making based on economics, you know, whether you think it's worth it, can impact the advice you really should be giving. I think, in my opinion, if a client asks if you should get a survey, the answer should be yes. And then if they don't think it's worth it, or if there are other circumstances, then, you know, you can go through it that way. But generally, every buyer should get a survey. I think they're incredibly valuable, because otherwise you don't know. You just don't know.
Anything like that, including inspections, even if the client asks you, you say yes. Otherwise, they're
Yeah,
going to hold
should
you
I get a
liable.
radon inspection? Yes.
Yes,
Should I get a
yes,
mold inspection?
mold, yes.
Absolutely. Should I go down and meet with the property manager? Yes.
Yeah.
Should I call Christian and Don down at the title company? Yes. Why not? The more information, the better. Get all the people to help you, because at least in our job, if we say not to do something and we end up being wrong, then it's a problem.
And then you've given the wrong advice, and it could be
Yeah,
malpractice.
you've told them not to worry about it, and it became a problem, and that's a challenge. All right, perfect. I love it. Kathy, thank you. Kathy says we have the same ears, so we'll leave you all at that.
Well, that's a weird thing to notice.
All right, guys, we'll see you next week. Thank you.